Hi, this is Sachin Bharti, and welcome to another episode of TFR Insights. CNCF has accepted Rancher's popular lightweight Kubernetes distribution K3s as its latest sandbox project. K3s was built to allow organizations to run Kubernetes in a resource-constrained environment such as IoT devices or at the edge. No pun intended, but Edge is a beast in its own capacity. To talk about Edge and K3s, today we have with us Shannon Williams, co-founder of Rancher Labs. Shannon, first of all, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here today.
Everybody defines Edge in their own way. I want to know from you, how would you define Edge computing?
Well, for us, we think of Edge as really being everything that's not in the data center or in the cloud. So as soon as we jump out and we're dealing with computing that's happening in people's homes, in the network, in space, or in factories, it's all the edge. It's all places that are outside, and there's sort of big edge and little edge, there's near edge and far edge, but in a lot of ways, to me, as soon as we're pushing out, we're moving away from sort of central computing repositories. We're in the edge.
And how does, when you look at the way you define edge, how does edge computing kind of differs in the cloud as compared to the old methodologies?
Well, as we move to kind of cloud computing and Kubernetes in the edge, we're definitely seeing some a push to do a lot more complex things. We used to think of the edge as a place of devices, right? Whether that was an ATM machine or as a medical device or even a car, they were all devices that were often somewhat connected, right? We maybe had a bit of connectivity to them, and they were fairly static. They didn't change. Now we're moving to an edge where with 5G, all of these devices are going to be really well connected. It'll be very easy to talk to them, and they're going to change a lot. We're going to want to push new software down to them all the time. And so that's what's really changing right now is we have much better connectivity to many, many, many more devices, all of which we want to put smarter and smarter software on. And we don't want the software to be static. We want it to be dynamic. And so that's leading to kind of new questions about how to do computing on all these edge devices.
And when we talk about edge or the shift to the edge, what role are technology like Kubernetes playing there?
Well, Kubernetes and maybe more importantly, containers have become really the standard way of computing in the data center in the last 6 years since Docker emerged and Kubernetes emerged. We've seen that new applications are being built with microservices in mind, with kind of compartmentalization of code, so that we can push out more and more quickly new features into the software we build. We can test it more accurately. We can do upgrades with less impact. And so, as we kind of move to a more modern way of running software in the central systems, in the data center and the cloud, it probably isn't surprising that all the edge infrastructure started to, people started to look at that and think it would also benefit from having the same velocity of innovation and the same sort of standardization of how we push code. So, people are looking at Docker and containers and saying this is a great way to get that change velocity we want to have in medical devices or in transportation systems or in cars, so that we can update the software more quickly. And now with Kubernetes as a nice orchestration of containers, what we saw and what the opportunity we saw with K3s was to come out with a Kubernetes distribution that was lightweight and could run anywhere, and then begin to use that as a way to show people what could be done with containers at the edge. And a little more than a year ago, we started to roll this technology out, and now it's kind of exploded like wildfires. Everyone rethinks what their software strategy is for all of the intelligent infrastructure they have out there in their companies.
I also want to talk to you a bit about how's the adoption or shift towards edge is affecting the development of Kubernetes itself? Because if you look at the Linux kernel days, when ARM entered the picture, they had constraint about power consumption, and the larger player, they did not care about power consumption and all those changes that were coming from that community. But suddenly that those changes made data centers more power efficient. The energy bills were like cutting at a massive scales. Companies were saving thousands and maybe even millions of dollars in the data centers. So there are, these kind of use cases, they do have an impact on a larger project. So what kind of impact would you see Edge will have on Kubernetes itself in general? Not specifically project like K3s, but in general.
Yeah, it's a great question. Swapnil, what happened, what you've seen happening already is that because we started, when you started asking questions like how to put Kubernetes on the edge, two things kind of bubbled up from a technical requirements. Kubernetes was already really powerful and really reliable. It was a really good way to run, but it was kind of built for scale, and it was relatively complex. And so two vectors that had to improve to make it work on the edge was, one, we had to simplify it, right? It couldn't require a ton of integration and operational management. We had to make it a lot easier to install, upgrade, and manage. So there was definitely a push towards how to simplify it. And then, on the second foot, we had to think about multi-cluster in a bigger way. In the early days, right? If you think about the heritage of Kubernetes, it comes from Borg, via Google's big, strategic platform for running computing, and Borg is like one massive system that runs loads and loads and loads and loads of Google services. Kubernetes was derived from that thinking, and it also was built in a lot of cases. When you thought about it, most companies that were thinking about Kubernetes were thinking, this is great, we're going to be able to run almost an operating system for our data center and do that at a big scale, and therefore minimize the cost of infrastructure. It'll get us better utilization. With an edge, we kind of take that whole premise and flip it over. Instead now of thinking of one giant cluster with thousands of machines, we're thinking of, thousands of machines, each one of which is a tiny little cluster. And so that's created new thinking about how to do management, fleet management of now thousands of Kubernetes clusters. That wasn't a problem that had to be solved when Kubernetes was first created, but it certainly is now. And it's one that's sort of the next big problem, is how to solve that. The other one is, one more on that thread is, even with K3s, we sort of took things to from big scale to small scale. There's still another level of scale sort of out there as we think about really small devices with very limited capacity, sensors or cameras, or things that have really small amounts of capacity on them. Even K3s is still too big for some of those type of use cases. So now the next level of thinking is, how do we go one step further? How do we get even smaller so that it really is just the operating system that Kubernetes value is sort of packed into? So lots of progression that this has caused in terms of thinking about multi-cluster and smaller workloads and better packaging of Kubernetes and simplification.
Right, and I was saying, Edge is a kind of beast in its own capacity. I mean, you can go all the way to smallest sensors, and you can even call Tesla's cars as Edge or IoT on wheels. So, what kind of unique challenges or complexities kind of Edge create for DevOps teams that you feel that, hey, these are problems that the DevOps teams are facing that needs to be solved?
Well, Teslas are a great example of where we see this stuff going, which is, we have projects literally active right now with car manufacturers looking at how to put this technology in cars. We have, projects with satellites that need to go into deep space that need to be able to run this type of technology. So we're seeing all the use cases right now, from retail to oil and gas to wind turbines to cars to trains to the signage that runs on a train platform, right? It all is compute, and it all has the potential to benefit. And so scale, right? Like the number one challenge is really scale. I think organizations are thinking, okay, this is a whole nother level, right? Running a cluster is one thing. Running 100 clusters is another thing. I mean, we built Rancher, the Rancher management product that we're known for, that we're famous for. It can manage hundreds of clusters, but it was clear that was not going to be enough to manage what we see coming down the pipe. And so, earlier this year, we introduced a project called Fleet, another open source project that is, gearing up to answer the question, how do you manage 1 million, Kubernetes clusters, all of which need to be managed using GitOps and very clean distribution of software. And so, those are the problems that are getting emerging. Security jumps up as a problem that sort of needs to be thought about. And in a lot of ways, what's exciting, though, is that so much of the innovation happening in the Kubernetes ecosystem is applicable to what's happening at the edge if we're able to bring Kubernetes with it. So the big advantage to using Kubernetes in all these places is that, every month there's new interesting projects emerging in the CNCF to, extend Kubernetes and to secure it better and to make it more usable and to make it more efficient. Almost, what we're seeing is a lot of those have applicability to the edge. So if we can standardize, it's almost, there's this enormous benefit to be gained for everyone, right? Because instead of having to kind of use totally different platforms when you're in the cloud, when you're in the data center, when you're in the edge, you get standardization and you can learn how to, coordinate how your apps and your services run and are upgraded and are secured uniformly across all of the different infrastructure and computing that an organization does.
Right. I mean, when you talk about all these use cases, it just once again remind me of Linux, because Linux, the same thing happened. There are so many use cases that you would not even think of it. And with when you're mentioning, those oil and gas, when you look at big data, traditionally it was just like collecting data. But when you talk about Tesla cars, you're also making a lot of decisions locally, and you're actually controlling a car there. So the complexities are kind of increasing. So when we look at the whole kind of whole spectrum of edge devices, where is edge in the maturity curve at this point?
Well, it's early. I mean, if you think about, look, when I say it's early for Kubernetes. Edge has existed for years. I mean, as long as there's been computing, there's been use cases for computing at the edge, and we've been doing interesting things for 50 years now. So it's not as if we're just now kind of putting chips and processors and OSs out at the edge. We're just looking at a new way to distribute the software and a better way to run those devices, and that's still pretty early. But I would say there's a potential convergence happening between Linux and the kubelet or Kubernetes in terms of what we run on endpoints. I don't think it's any accident that Rancher was acquired or agreed to be acquired this year by SUSE, right, a big OS vendor, and that the OS vendors are really really close to the chip manufacturers and to the organizations developing all of these platforms that use embedded systems. And so I continue to expect that there is going to be a continued convergence of operating system and Kubernetes at the endpoint. And we're going to have central logic that deals with how to manage all of these nodes, and it's going to be standardized and based on Kubernetes. And we're going to have smart endpoints that can run lots of containers, can prioritize which containers to run, can easily swap out containers, or do A/B testing on different functionality and features, so that the experience that a developer has who's working on edge computing is going to be really similar to the experience a developer has working in AWS or in Google Cloud, right? They're going to have all the resources they need to build the more complex applications, the ones that use AI and ML and really do intelligent things. So that's where we're heading, and it's early, but it's happening. It's interesting how I think we thought we may have been a little further ahead of the market than we actually were when we released K3s last year. And when the discussion about whether to accept it as a CNCF project really got going, what was interesting was how many of the users really just said 100% yes. We're thrilled to see this become part of the CNCF because we're already using it. It's critical to our future, and it is going to be a big part of our edge strategy.
And you mentioned SUSE, and if you look at OS vendors, users, they don't use the OS itself, and in today's world, OS itself is not enough. So you do need to bring in all those components. So I'm actually really excited to see the whole formalization of this collaboration between SUSE and Rancher, and they also have lightweight Linux distribution like MicroOS and other things that they are working on. So it will be as interesting, space to watch out for. Going back to Edge, you sometimes what happens, a lot of technologies, they are there at the right time, and that whether it was Linux or whether it was Kubernetes. So when we look at all these edge use cases, we can also say the it is been driven by because all these technologies are not now available for, because we have been stuck in this IoT field for so long, but suddenly we are seeing an explosion in the use cases because of all these technology like Kubernetes and everything else. So it's like chicken and egg situation. So what I want to ask you is that what are the factors that will kind of drive the maturity of edge?
Well, I think one of the big ones was this, right? Was like a really good way to distribute software and a good concept of sort of what a next generation operating system looked like for the endpoint. And so you're totally right, right? Like we've been talking about IoT and edge for 15 years, realistically, since the, 2007, 2008, there was GE and Siemens, and everyone's been talking about edge platforms and IoT platforms and how we're going to get to these incredible levels. But everything up till now has felt like a walled garden, right? It's like, come bring your infrastructure to me and I'll provide this garden of analytics and show you how you can monetize it or use it. And the reality is, it's kind of the opposite of how most technology works, right? Most technology is put out into the field by the organizations that want to use it to their own benefit, right? If you're a bank, you care about your ATM machines, or if you're a ATM manufacturer, you care about your ATM machines, or if you're a medical device manufacturer or hospital, you care about what's on and what's running on an MRI scanner, or if you're a car manufacturer, you care about what goes in your car. So everyone sort of really, I think there's a lot of reluctance to sort of outsource IoT to another vendor. People really want to, they see this is their infrastructure, right? They have the most expertise of anyone in the world on what software should run on an ATM or an MRI machine or a traffic light or a car. And so I think a lot of the initial approaches were, people were maybe looking to others. And with something like Kubernetes emerging and containers, it's like they can look and say, oh, I don't need to look to someone else to figure out how to put the right software and how to connect up all these systems. I can do it myself, just like I do in the data center, just like I do in the cloud. And that's going to give me business opportunities, ways to deliver, ideally, a better experience to my customers, the thing they really care about, right? Something that makes the customers delighted. Not I'm transforming my business model to sell data, but rather I'm going to be able to deliver, much more dynamic software to the places so that people can really love the experiences I'm selling them on my products. And so, or make those products more effective or easy to manage or whatever. So I think that, like most things, you kind of come at it from 4 or 5 different ways. And then all of a sudden it's like the technology catches up and everyone sees that they can do it themselves. And then the explosion of innovation happens everywhere at the same time. And you just have everyone writing, trying, learning, and of course, some people will find a lot more value than others in doing this. But I think it's once that technology the bar is low enough that everyone can do it, that and the use cases are more obvious, then I think everything just accelerates, and we're definitely in that phase right now. So we're just beginning it. Right? We're just kind of beginning that phase.
Do you think now we have everything covered from this announcement and edge perspective?
Yeah, I think we're covered a lot. It's been a good conversation. I mean, I'm super excited to see K3s get into the CNCF. I'm really excited the direction the CNCF is going. It's continuing to sort of really advocate for an open ecosystem where cool projects, wherever they came from and whatever they look like, can find open governance and attract market and attract adoption and give organizations a lot of comfort. And one of the reason we wanted to donate K3s is we felt in our conversations that a lot of companies were, a little bit hesitant to use it, really broadly without knowing that it was fully under open source governance. And so by contributing to the CNCF, we could really take away that concern and let people really feel confident that whatever they used, not only would they have an open source license, which K3s always have, but it would never be taken away. Nothing would ever change. And that's what, the CNCF is just a great organization and doing a really nice job on providing homes for valuable projects.
I fully agree with you, and because they are part of Linux Foundation, big umbrella, which also kind of allows a lot of cross pollination. It also allows a lot of players you would not typically see under the same roof, but that allows a lot of players. LF energy, you can bring LF, machine learning, deep learning. So it's an amazing place to be at. Shannon, once again, thank you for taking your time out today and talk about Edge and K3s. And I look forward to talk to you again. Thank you.
Absolutely, Swapnil. It was great to talk with you. This is a lot of fun. Have a great day.